see anybody else, so let's go on ahead and get started. You see the title at the top there, and as the introduction talks about, you wonder why we have to talk about humility. You understand that humility is a positive trait, pride is a negative one, but it's going to be neat to see as we go through this. The way the readings for today really help us think about what Christ-like humility looks like. I'll share with you, there's a quote that I have in the sermon, to me has always been a good definition of humility. Humility is knowing who you are, knowing who God is, and understanding the difference. And I think if you understand what I mean by that, don't we sometimes try to flip that around and we want to try to play God or tell God and that type of thing, or we don't realize our sin in that. So it's a good reminder to have this study on humility. Where we're going to spend a fair amount of our time is the gospel lesson, which ironically also happens to be our sermon text for this morning. So that'll be a good study for all of us and that type of thing. Somebody want to read for us those words from Luke 14? Go ahead.
One Sabbath day when Jesus went into the house of the leader of the Pharisees to eat bread, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how they were selecting the places of honor, he told the invited guests a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline in the place of honor, or perhaps someone more distinguished than you might have been invited. The one who invited him, both of you may come and tell you, give this man your place. Then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and recline in the lowest place, so that when the one who invited you comes, he will tell you, friend, move up to a higher place. Then you'll have honor in the presence of all who are reclining at the table with you. Yes, everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. He also said to the one who had invited him, when you make a dinner or a supper, do not invite your friends, or your brothers, or your relatives, or your rich neighbors, so that perhaps they may also return the favor and pay you back. But when you make a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. Certainly you will be repaid in the resurrection of the righteous. Gospel.
So the first question there, and it sort of implies this was back then. What difference did it make where people sat at formal dinners? And you think about it, isn't that still the case today? What difference does it make where you sit? What does that often say about who you are, what people think of you, and that type of thing?
The closer you are to the host or the honored guest, the more important you are.
Yep. And you think about that today, right? A lot of times, if you go to a wedding and they have assigned seating, if you are family or close friend, you're going to be closer to the head table. I wonder sometimes, I was thinking about this, do we as good Lutherans, is the reason all the Lutherans sit in the back because we want to be humble, or are there other reasons? You think about that, right? But, that whole thing, typically when we go to some sort of an event, we want to sit the absolute closest to the front we can, right? I'm trying to think, one of the big country music stars was in Milwaukee earlier this week, and I saw one of my friends posted, they said they got upgraded to front row seats, and I commented to somebody, they were literally almost looking up the singer's nose, that's how close they were. But that's the type of thing where people get excited about, right? Hey, I paid $20 for my ticket, I end up getting a $120 ticket, so you get promoted and that type of thing, and it's the same thing here. The interesting thing, if you read this, I don't know that there were necessarily assigned seats. Wasn't there almost a clamor to get to the front, right? And what happened when the host of the dinner came in? He started shooing people up, up, you don't belong here, you get to the back, and you have the whole, that's humiliation. In your pride, you sat in the front, and the host says to you, get your butt out of here and move to the back of the room, and he invites somebody else up, and then the converse as well, right? You're trying to be humble or not acting like you're a big deal, and you sit in the back of the room, and the host invites you to the front. Everybody's going, ooh, they're important, right? Or they're a good friend of the host, or something else like that. So why did Jesus tell, so Jesus was actually at a dinner himself. Why did he tell the guest of the dinner at the house of the leader of the Pharisees this parable?
Because he observed their behavior.
They were the ones wanting the front seats, right? There was no humility. They all thought they were big shots and that type of thing, and so he needed to teach them a little bit of a lesson in humility. So I don't know that we need to have any small group discussion because we are the small group, right? Imagine that you are teaching this parable today. Rather than sitting at a wedding feast, how might you teach humility in our current day and age? So I think the wedding feast analogy still has some relevance, but are there any other illustrations that you thought of at all as far as humility and this type of thing?
Well, it makes me think of an embarrassing situation that happened. I was when I worked for Church Mutual Insurance, there was a dinner that they had, and the president of the company was there. And he was a fairly new president, but anyways, we had a round table of about 8 or 10 people, and across from me was my associate, who was probably one of the leading salesmen in the company. And the president wanted to talk to this new gal that was sitting next to him. And so there was an empty chair on the other side, and he went to this salesman and said, you sit there. And he, everybody's went like that, and he just got up and he moved to the chair, and then the president sat down there and was talking to that young lady. And she was embarrassed, obviously, but just with a couple of words like that, how someone can put you down.
And obviously, from what you're saying, everybody else respected this guy, and they're like, obviously, the new president didn't know who the guy was, right?
Well, yeah, that's part of it, but the other thing is, how could he be so rude?
Right. Oh, that's okay. Yeah. I mean, there's a number of things with that. Yeah.
I mean, you sit there like a,
I mean, not even pleased. It was just wow.
yeah, so everybody got red, for that poor guy that,
You could have said, would it be okay to move? I'd like to talk to her for a little while.
well,
You could have said it that way.
yeah, any kind of a request instead of an order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Any other illustrations that you can think of humility? Trying to teach it in our day and age.
I just look at I taught in public schools for many, many years, and now the thing is, teach kids to be prideful of themselves and their own abilities, and there is a thing about, you want to feel good about yourself, but some of them take it too far, and it's like, yeah, I'm number one, I don't care about anybody else, and they've learned that lesson. That's very dangerous.
You're playing right into, if we have any kids, what's going to be my children's devotion today, because that's what, yeah. I mean, that's to me one of the illustrations. You want to see the whole thing with humility. Young kids are always, they want to be first, or that type of thing, and having others. So, the one I thought of, we like to go to a few Brewer games every year, and I was talking about the front row ticket at the concert. You always see those individuals who they're supposed to be sitting way up in section 400 in the top of the stadium. Well, nobody's gonna notice if I sneak down and sit here, and then they've got to take the walk of shame. The other people who actually have the tickets come up, and then they'll try to play dumb or whatever, that type of thing, or sometimes even the usher has to come. That's the real walk of shame, right? When the usher has to come and escort you and say, "Get your butt out of here," and that type of thing. So yeah, I always look at it this way, and it's ironic, I think, too, that Jesus told this parable at the house of the leader of the Pharisees. Because if you read the scriptures, I don't think the Pharisees were exactly examples of humility, were they?
Fancy robes.
They thought, exactly. The fancy robes and everything else, they thought they were a big deal. And the example you used, I could see that would be something one of the Pharisees would, you do this because exactly. So, next one there, why does Jesus tell the host to invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind to a dinner? Think about the guest list.
Yeah. They didn't have the means or ability to be paid. And I think if you expand on that with what Jesus taught otherwise, they were the least of these. So he looked at them as his brothers and sisters, and whatever he did for the least of these.
Right. Yeah, that's a true example of the least, right? You're right. The guest list is who. It's not just who can I have because I like them, or who can I invite to my dinner because it's going to make me look good, or I've got some big shot or some famous person or something like that. So, any other thoughts on the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind? I have one. I don't know if you've heard about it a lot, and maybe it's just because I intersect with special ministries an awful lot. But there is a growing emphasis in our synod on what is called compassion ministry. And isn't this a great illustration of compassion ministry? You're finding those who maybe normally wouldn't be considered or touched or that type of thing. If you look at a couple weeks, the symposium at the seminary is all about compassion ministry. And you look at the things that our synod has done, but maybe we haven't intentionally focused on them, all the places we have. The big one that is getting increasing emphasis is Christian aid and relief. I think as good Lutherans, a lot of times, we wanted to make sure that we were not shirking away from the gospel. So what did we do? We have to place all the emphasis on the gospel, and it was almost sometimes like any of these social things that we do, that's taboo. And now we're recognizing you can do both and, right? I mean, I've heard somebody say, if you look at Jesus' ministry, how much of Jesus' ministry wasn't compassion ministry? And I think we're recognizing more and more opportunity. Christian aid and relief, intentionally encouraging congregations to go out and find things and do things. I mean, how many congregations are not just doing things to serve their members, but they're looking, I saw in the last couple of weeks, congregations going and doing things where they're welcoming students and teachers in a public school on the first day of school. 20 years ago in our synod, people would have been going, "What are you doing? You shouldn't be doing that." And now we're recognizing we need, those are people, we need to find ways to touch them and that type of thing. So I think it's good stuff there. Next one, why don't Christians want to be repaid in this life? If you look in verse 12 there, Jesus said, when you make a dinner, do not invite your friends so that perhaps they may also return the favor and pay you back. And really, there's two parts of that. There's not being repaid in this life, and then in the next part of it, in verse 13, Jesus says you will be repaid in the resurrection of the righteous. So why don't we necessarily want to be repaid in this life?
I would say, if
tainted somehow, yeah. Yeah.
Comes from God, so
Yeah.
ultimately, every credit goes back to him.
So the other part too about being, if we're simply focusing on getting repaid in this life, what are we very likely neglecting? Eternal life, right? Yep. Jesus talked about, store up treasure, don't store up treasures here on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. And I think this ties into that very well, doesn't it? If we are looking to get repaid in this life, are we simply seeking to store up treasures in heaven? Let's just pause there for a second. How easy is it to get caught up in that whole thing of doing stuff for this life? I shared with all of you the addition we're putting on our house. There has been more than once when we, even in the midst of this project, I'm like, am I focusing too much on the things of this life? And how easy that is. Am I content with what I have? Yeah, but taking the blessings that God has given you, but I think that's a good thing. So then the last one there, you will be repaid in the resurrection of the righteous. Is Jesus teaching salvation by works? The answer is no, but now explain. The good follow-up teacher question is explain. So if he's not teaching righteousness by works, what is he talking about when he says you will be repaid in the resurrection of the righteous?
Kind of fits with the conversation Jerry and I were having out by the gardens
Okay?
yesterday. We were talking about your rewards or your blessings and how the prosperity gospel guys, you do this and you're gonna get all this on stuff on earth. No, the blessings that we get can be like family, good health, things that are intrinsic, not extrinsic. How does it go? That yes, you'll be blessed here too, but not in the way that some people think of blessings. It's not how much money we have or the most toys we have.
He who dies with the most toys wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're already at the age that we are seeing that we can have too much stuff.
Oh,
Because, I look at my basement and I say, geez, what am I gonna do with all this junk?
yeah, the kids don't want it. We try to give it away and they won't take it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so you're not going to get to the point where you want to curse your kids that they're going to be cursing you because they have to clean all this stuff out of the basement someday? I think there's another important part of this. And Jesus talks about it, when he talks about, whatever you talk about doing for the least of these, but he said, you did this, and you did this, and you did this, and you did this. And they're like, Lord, when would we do this? What is Jesus talking about? Those things that we do, they're not good works for salvation, but they are what?
Evidence of our faith.
Exactly, right. Fruits of faith. That's what they are. And we're going to look at it a little bit when we get into the James reading in a second, and some of the other stuff that James talked about, but everything with fruits of faith. And I think that's one maybe, back to what we were talking about earlier, we as Lutherans have been so focused on preaching, justification and Christ did it all, that have we maybe sometimes not focused on the sanctification part and the fruits of faith? And I think that's it's not an either or, it's a both and, isn't it? You need to have both and, that type of thing.
And it's part of our worship in our everyday lives, rather than just looking at Sunday morning worship. But the way that we worship God, it's a reasonable service. This is what he calls us to do. And when we do it, we're only doing what we've been called to do.
Yeah, yeah. And think about what we were just talking about with some of the stuff with compassion ministry and that. When we actually show those fruits of faith in the course of our daily life, the unbeliever goes, there's something different about that person. And, I always like the part about that, they may ask you, why did you do that? And what does that do? It opens the door to share Jesus and that type of thing. So.
At least the one thing that I can
We could spend an awful lot of time, there's a lot of stuff in that gospel, isn't there? Like I said, I'm glad we can do a little bit more than what we're gonna do with the sermon in a little bit, but anything else on the gospel lesson? Let's move on to the second reading from James chapter 2, a little bit longer reading there. Somebody wanna take that one and? Okay, go ahead.
My brothers, have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ without showing favoritism. For example, suppose a man enters your worship assembly wearing gold rings and fine clothing, and a poor man also enters wearing filthy clothing. If you look with favor on the man wearing fine clothing and say, "Sit here in this good place," but you tell the poor man, "Stand over there," or "Sit down here at my feet," have you not made a distinction among yourselves to become judges with evil opinions? Listen, my dear brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and to be heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him? But you dishonored the poor man. Don't the rich oppress you, and don't they drag you into court? Aren't they the ones who blaspheme the noble name that was pronounced over you? However, if you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," you are doing well. But if you show favoritism, you are committing a sin, since you are convicted by this law as transgressors. In fact, whoever keeps the whole law but stumbles in one point has become guilty of breaking all of it. For the one who said, "Do not commit adultery," also said, "Do not commit murder." Now, if you do not commit adultery, but you do commit murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law of freedom. For there will be judgment without mercy on the one who has not shown mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment.
In verse 4, James tells us not to become judges with evil opinions. Explain that. So you look at all of verses 1 through 4. How are you a judge with evil opinion?
It's easy to make a snap judgment based on the outward appearance.
That's a great, yeah, you see there, the people, you got on the one hand, the person who is dressed in fine clothes, oh, they must be rich and they've got it all. And then you go on, you've got verse 3 there, tell the poor man, "Stand over there," or "Sit at my feet. Have you not made a distinction among yourselves and become judges with evil opinion?" There's a lot of different ways that this is expressed, and you think about it just probably in the last couple of years in our society, how I think people have come to understand just because you see one thing going on in a person's life, do you know everything that's going on? The obvious answer is no. I love the meme that has a great big circle, and then it says underneath that this is what someone else's life is, and then there's a small speck in it, and it says what you know about it. Do we understand the struggles that they're going through and everything else? And I think, rather than making a judgment, one of the things that I've always encouraged people is, rather than saying something, ask something. Ask them a question and seek to understand. And I'm a big proponent of asking questions because it does a whole lot of stuff. It helps you learn more information about people. I said, I was talking about this wedding that I've got this afternoon. The parents of the bride, this is now the third of their 3 daughters that I've married. But we ended up sitting, just my wife and I and the mother and father of the bride, at a table last night. I've known this couple for 20-some years, and I learned more about them in an hour conversation at dinner because I asked a whole lot of questions. Rich versus poor, the problem existed in James' day. How does he equalize them? Think about the way that James takes that word rich and poor, and what are really the 2 meanings that he applies to them. You can be either rich how or how. physically, spiritually. You can be poor physically or spiritually. And that's really the whole point that James is making. You know, just because someone outwardly looks rich, they might not have a whole lot of spiritual. On the other hand, you know, the person who looks poor, they may not look physically like they have a whole lot, but I in my circle of influence in that, I always think of the people in the country of Malawi. You go there, physically they have nothing. But spiritually, they don't know what they don't have. They are very content in their poverty, and they have some absolutely incredible faith. So, have you ever heard, just one more comment about this, and then we'll move on. Have you ever heard about how sometimes pastors or whatever will dress up like a poor person and sit, you know what I'm talking about, sit outside their church and see, A, if people notice, and B, what are the comments that people make. I read one of those when the pastor revealed later on there was a whole lot of this going on, like, oh boy, I blew it. So, how easily we judge and don't necessarily show our faith. What is wrong, or how do the words love your neighbor as yourself help us solve the problem of favoritism?
Just assume everybody else is your equal and treat them as such.
What would be a good restatement of love your neighbor as yourself? What does that tell me to do?
Treat others the way you want to be treated.
That's exactly it, right? Yeah. You know, I don't necessarily, you know, I don't want somebody else looking down at me, so why would I be looking down at someone else? And that whole treating your neighbor the same. What's wrong with favoritism? What law does it break? Which commandments? Pardon? Murder, yeah. It's really the fifth commandment. You know, you're not taking and sticking a knife in someone's back, but instead of showing love, you're showing hate, right? That to me is, that was always, you know, in the days when I was teaching catechism class. And you understand, you teach the kids that to hate is to kill. And I saw an awful lot of wide-eyed little kids, and I said, yeah, you say to your brother or sister or your classmate, I hate you, you may as well have just stuck a knife in their back. I'm like, what? Yeah. The best part to me of that reading is the last four words. Mercy triumphs over judgment.
Is that just the new translation? I don't remember that from before, and it's like, wow, that's good.
Yeah, I did not go back and look at what the NIV 84 translation was, but think about what we were talking about earlier. What do we so often, what does our human nature want to show? Judgment, right? You think about what we were talking earlier about compassion ministry. You know, are we, and I think it's a good thing for us to think about. As I interact with every single person in my life on a daily basis, whether in my words, my actions, or my thoughts, am I expressing judgment or am I showing mercy? And
It's the same.
it is the same.
Yeah.
I don't know why I don't remember it from I mean, that translation is fantastic, but think about which of those two we probably realistically show more mercy or judgment. Unfortunately, right? God forgive us for the way that we judge others.
I don't think we even give people the benefit of the doubt.
That's a great, right? Yeah. We have in our minds, we've formed an opinion. Yep. I will give you an example. That this is something, and it was in our own personal lives, and it's made things really awkward. Our house and our neighbors, there is maybe 8 feet in between. And for whatever reason, both kitchen windows, you look out our kitchen window and our neighbor's kitchen window is right there. I am a fan of, I've always wanted to, whenever I'm in the kitchen, I put the blind down because A, I don't want them seeing me and I don't want to be tempted to look. A week ago, Tuesday morning, my wife got a text from our neighbor. I know you saw us talking to the police in our kitchen last night. Please don't ask anything, it's a family matter. Think of the first 2 words of that text. I know. And my wife was really hurt by it. And then she really struggled how to respond. She said, A, I don't make it a habit of looking in your kitchen. B, I have no idea what you're talking about. I think you can probably understand the division that, I mean, not that we're best of friends, but we're social to them and everything else, and the more difficult part is it's made it really awkward between us and our neighbors. Because all of a sudden they said something like that. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, I was gone, and my wife texted me. She goes, I was sitting on, or she said, I got a text from the lady next door, the one who sent this text to her, and said, hey, acting like nothing ever happened, let's sit on the back patio and chat. And my wife said that was the most awkward half hour I've ever had because she's trying to act like nothing ever happened. And she said, and she texted her, she said, I forgive you, but this is difficult.
In the light of what we've been talking about, how would you put the best construction on that? Perhaps the lady was only thinking, well, over the years we've had each other's back. I know you watch out for us like we watch out for you.
Yeah.
But right away, we're kind of put back as far as looking at, well, what are they saying?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's and it was interesting because I don't know. It was at 12. It wasn't even 24 hours later. She got a text back from a neighbor. I looked back at my original text to you and I realized I was a little aggressive. Oh, really?
I'm sure she was in a stressful moment though too.
Yeah, exactly. But and it was no, we didn't see a thing. But a simple accusation like that and the difficulty and everything that is. Well, and so it was funny. All of a sudden, my wife goes, "Oh, I understand why you put the blind down all the time now." Because I mean, it's literally, if the light's on either way, it's not like you make a habit of looking, but it was just, it was a judging thing that was done, that type of thing, and it was pretty crazy. So, last reading, a short 2 verses. Proverbs 25, 6 and 7. I'll go ahead and read those and then we can wrap things up here. Do not honor yourself in a king's presence. Do not stand in a place reserved for great people, because it's better to be told, come up here, than for you to be humiliated before a ruler whom your eyes have seen. I mean, isn't that really taking the gospel lesson and shrinking it down to 2 verses? I thought that's very interesting. Why does the author tell us to be careful about exalting ourselves before the king? I think we've talked about that, right? Because the king may say, somebody else come up here, you go, you take the walk of shame and go to the back. What could be the result of humbly taking a lower seat before the king? Yeah. Yeah, all of a sudden the king says, yeah, you sitting way there in the back, you come and sit at my table. You ever had that happen to you? Where you unexpectedly?
The funniest thing is a good old friend of ours died down in Kenosha there, and at his funeral was Chet Felton, and Myrna, his wife, when we had the dinner after
So immediately your table became the head table.
Really, it was funny, yeah, it was nice visits, we sure enjoyed it, but she was good with Chet being up and having, he was an elder with me and stuff like that, and we've known him for years, and so, yeah, it was a kind of celebration.
Yeah.
But sometimes the kids' table is the most fun table to be at.
No doubt about it.
Then that was family meals where you look around and say, I'm gonna sit with them all day.
Go have fun because there's no pretensions. They're just, they don't care what anybody's thinking about them, that type of thing. I'll give you a quick illustration. So next weekend, we have a wedding that my wife has helped. My wife and the mother of the bride are really good friends. And the mother of the bride's been bouncing various things off my wife. And about a week ago, she said, she shared a conversation that her daughter had with her. And the daughter said to the mom, there are, because the daughter's working on a seating chart, she said, there are 2 seats left at your table. If you could have anybody sit with you, who would you do? And it was just, my wife was blown away that we are sitting with the parents of the bride. It's like, you know, we know the whole family and everything else, but sort of the same type of thing. All of a sudden, the fact that you unexpectedly get brought there, you don't expect that at all. So, yeah, sometimes assigned seating is good. Sometimes it's interesting. Good. Why don't we wrap things up with a prayer? Dear Jesus, we recognize as we've dug into your word the last little bit how often pride and judgment creeps into our hearts. We ask that you forgive us of that. Help us to understand who the least of these are in our lives and to seek to do what we can to include them. Let that love and that light of Christ not only shine in our hearts but also shine out in our lives as we seek to welcome everyone as you did. Bless us to that end in our lives today and every day. In your name, O Jesus.